For APA Part 2, we're going to talk about how to write a paragraph appropriately and use in-text citations. So going back to the paper I had used before, and know that I created this paper just for you. I wanted to give you some examples of the proper way to write an APA paper. So number one, it's really important to know that a paragraph is a minimum of 3 sentences. There are very few occasions, very few, where a 2-sentence paragraph will fly. Okay, so a minimum of 3 sentences. And when you're writing your sentences, you need to do as best as you can to use multiple sources. This is really just affirming that more than one person said this, because we all know that just because one person says something doesn't mean it's true. So whenever possible, you want to use multiple sources. So here's an example in the paper I wrote. Okay, in this sentence right here, I talk about how Harry Potter helped kids develop their own sense of ethical reasoning and critical thinking. But I built this sentence not from a quote. It's a summary of what both Edwards and Mahajan said. And so I pulled these 2 sources together to make my own sentence. And that's really what you're trying to do with APA writing. Okay, and so you can see then that what I did is I wrote my own sentence. It's not a quote. It's a summary of what the 2 authors said. And then I put both authors at the end of the sentence. You can see I did author's last name, comma, year, a semicolon, and then second author, comma, year. They are organized alphabetically, and they're not in the middle of a sentence. So in APA, we don't put references in the middle of a sentence because it's not about half of the sentence was from Edwards and half was from Mahajan. A really well-written sentence, you can't tell exactly who said what. You're pulling them together into one. Okay, so it's clear, it's concise, and it's summarized. Now there's a couple of other ways to do in-text citations we'll talk about on the next slide. But as you read through this, the goal is not to expand all and use all the words. Instead, with APA, it's really about concise statements, short and sweet, all right? So here's an example right here. I could have written, according to Edwards, who is an author of this article from Rolling Stones, 2024. We don't do that. You just say according to Edwards, because if I want to know who that person is, I'm going to go to your references page. That's my job as the reader. If I want to know really who it is, then I'm going to go find the information. Okay, so again, short and sweet. So let's talk then about in-text citations. And there's a lot of nuance to how you do this, okay? But I'm going to try to cover as much of it as possible. And I'll say that I don't expect you all to be experts at doing this. I don't expect you to be an expert, but I do expect you to try. And if I give feedback, I expect you to work on implementing that feedback whenever possible. So number one, the biggest thing that you really got to understand is you have to have sources to support every claim that you make. So if you're writing a paper and you're going to state that the sky is blue, I need a peer-reviewed paper that says and supports the statement that the sky is blue. Okay? You can't just say that. Even if it's, if obviously the sky is blue is very, very common knowledge, okay? But you really need to have, whenever possible, some kind of source to support what you're claiming. And so you'll see as I read your papers that I'm going to ask, like, where's your support? Where's your support? Really, when you think about how to write APA, it's really about learning how to use the literature to support your arguments. And so that's why I hammer on it so hard. Okay? So, let's talk about the sandwich method. I call it the sandwich method. I don't know that anyone else does, but it's what I call the sandwich method. So, when you're writing a paragraph, you want to give reference to every one that you use to create the paragraph. But sometimes the whole paragraph is from the same person. So let's look at this paragraph 3, political and social commentary. The first sentence says, the Harry Potter series approached several world issues through the characters' experiences. And that came from Edwards. Okay, so I'm going to make note that it came from Edwards. But then when you read the next sentence, the wizarding world faced its own version of racism through the issues between muggles, half-bloods, and full-blood wizards. And note that I do not have a citation here. The reason I don't have that is because it's still from Edwards. So I don't need to say Edwards again. All right, but when you'll see in a second, when you are finished with Edwards, you cite them again, okay? So in the next sentence, the resistance against Voldemort's regime serves as an allegory for the fight against totalitarianism and bigotry. Edwards. So what we have here is in this entire section is from Edwards, and I used the sandwich method. There's 3 sentences here, and I noted Edwards at the beginning. The middle sentence, I didn't know anybody. It's still from Edwards. But when I finished using Edwards in this paragraph, I noted Edwards again. Okay, so we would sandwich whenever we need to. So you do end up spending a lot of time and space writing out author names, but that's what we want. We want you to have multiple authors to support what you're stating, to prove that the science and the writing and the literature supports what you're saying. All right, so let's take a look at quotes. Now, quotes require a page number and a paragraph number, or a paragraph number, depending on what you're using. Okay, so if it's a book or a journal article, we're going to use a page number. If it's a website, you're going to use a paragraph number. Now, there are very few websites you should be using, right? Very clear organizational websites, stuff that you know is supportive, but the Times is not really what we're looking for here. We're looking for peer-reviewed scientific articles and websites, okay? But let's look at a sample quote here in paragraph 2. According to Edwards, 2024. So this is one way that we can reference the author. Again, I didn't say according to John Edwards, the author and most amazing human of the Rolling Stones, right? I'm just saying according to Edwards. That's who wrote this. And then the year of the reference. And then here's my paragraph. Rowling's work has been credited with revitalizing the fantasy genre. So note that it goes according to Edwards and the year, comma, quote, statement word for word, quote, then a parenthesis, para 3, parenthesis, period. So this is where I'm talking about there's a lot of nuance, okay? But this is the right way to structure the sentence. So I've said that if you're going to go look at the Edwards article, it's obviously a website because I gave you the paragraph. You will find this exact sentence in paragraph 3. And that's what in-text citations are meant to do. They are meant to help you or help the reader of the paper find those specific pieces of information All right, so it's supposed to like weave and tie together with your reference page. So your reference page needs to be accurate as much as possible, okay? So again, in the second or the third paragraph at the bottom of the page, you can see another quote, and I did it differently. So in this paragraph, I said according to Edwards, and I started it that way. Here in this paragraph, I just started with the quote. The resistance against Voldemort's regime serves as an allegory for the fight against totalitarianism and bigotry, end quote. And then it was Edwards, year, paragraph. Okay, if this was a book, it would be Edwards, year, page. So there are lots of different ways, but we don't try to weave the quotes in as a half of a sentence or middle of a sentence or anything like that, okay? OWL Purdue is going to be your best resource. They have a great website that can help you do all of this. But you really need to give effort to the nuance so that you create a very well written paper. So that's the end of part 2, and we'll move on to part 3 at the next video.